Hi and welcome. I'm Elizabeth Otters-White, and this video is part of the Standout Professor resources, which are designed to help academics of all backgrounds and identities thrive. In this particular video, I'm going to reflect on some of my experience as a PhD student in hopes of normalizing some of the self-doubt and other difficult emotions that I think so many of us experience when we're working towards a PhD. So first, let's just acknowledge, life as a grad student is crazy. And for sure, for me, it was the hardest thing that I'd done up to that point in my life. It really, to be honest, sort of crushed my confidence. I had tons of insecurities, and I don't think this is uncommon. So as I said, I'd like to try to normalize some of this. And I think the message really that I hope to communicate today is that you are not alone and you know more than you think. So I'm going to talk through a couple of experiences, reflect on those, and hopefully it will help. So I want to start by talking about this assumption that I often operated under and that I see very many people operate under, which is that if we don't understand something, it's a reflection on us. In other words, it's some shortcoming of ours. So let me give a couple of examples that illustrate this, and then maybe also illustrate how we can turn this around. So during my first year as a PhD student, I was getting a PhD in finance. So I was studying various kinds of economics, and during a micro exam, I think this was in my very first term as a PhD student, midway through the exam, the professor got all of our attention and just said, if you're working on problem 3, you should stop working on it because I don't think there's a solution. Now, problem 3 was one of maybe 5 at the most, right? Problems on the exam. We had like 2 hours to work on it. So this was not like, a little thing, right? Like 100 problems and one of them has a little issue, right? This is something that people could have presumably spent most of the time in the exam to that point on this particular problem. Lots I could say about that. I think, though, the point that I'm hoping to make here is that, again, if we were struggling with that problem, that really wasn't about us. That really wasn't a shortcoming, right? Later on in my PhD program, I remember having a conversation with a faculty member about a particular sort of problem or a way to approach a problem. And I left his office really not understanding his answer. In other words, why what he had proposed would be the right answer. And I thought about it, and I read about it, and I talked to other PhD students about it. And ultimately, I got up enough confidence and courage to go back to him. To be clear, this was some days later. And say, I'm not sure I understand why it's this. And he said, oh, well, tell me what you're thinking. And so I explained it, and he said, that sounds right. So needless to say, this was a huge waste of time. It was emotionally draining, and this kind of behavior on my part did not stop when I was a PhD student. I continued these kinds of things once I was a faculty member interacting with senior colleagues. So I can remember many times that I did the same thing with collaborators, senior faculty that I was working with on research projects, where they would say something, I would feel like I had no idea what they were talking about. Rather than saying, I have no idea what you're talking about, or could you say a little more about that? I would leave their office, I would call a friend, I would try to figure out what the heck was going on before I would muster the courage to go in and say some version of, I have no idea what we're talking about. I will say that one senior colleague who was a close collaborator did at one point say something to me that was really helpful. He was asking me to review something that he'd written. It wasn't for something we'd collaborated on. And I did not understand part of it. And I sort of said to him, pointed that out, right? And sort of said, it might just be that I don't get it. And he said something like, no. If you don't understand it, that's a problem. So maybe that's good advice for all of us. In other words, Perhaps it's not our shortcoming. Perhaps there's a mistake. Perhaps something hasn't been communicated clearly, right? So let's keep ourselves open to this possibility. I think what this gets at is this underlying question of, are we willing to risk being wrong? And I could spend lots of time talking about how academia, I think, does not create an environment that encourages us to risk being wrong. And that's a real problem. And yet, right now, that is sort of the environment that we're operating in. I know that I was so worried about what my professors or later on my colleagues would think of me, that I not only wasted a lot of time, as I illustrated in the examples a few minutes ago, but I also missed opportunities to be helpful. So I can, again, just to share a story, I remember being a first-year PhD student. So as I said, I was studying finance, so I was taking econometrics. And I remember overhearing a conversation in the copy room between a faculty member and a more advanced PhD student about a particular econometric method and sort of how it worked. And I overheard this, and it just so happened that I was taking a class that covered that very specific topic. So I pretty much knew exactly what the answer was. And they were sort of fumbling around. And it just kind of, I don't know. I mean, it almost never occurred to me. I shouldn't say that, that's too strong. But I did not have the confidence to even allow for the possibility that I knew something that they did not know. I sort of assumed it must be that I'm missing something, right? It's a deeper question that they're asking. It's more involved, it's more complex. When in fact it wasn't. And I knew the answer. And they just didn't, because it had been years since they'd studied this, right? It's a very specific thing. So this assumption, going in that I assumed I was missing something hurt me in so many ways. It hurt others as well, right? Which sometimes can be a stronger motivator for us to try to change when we see that it's not only hurting ourselves, but it's hurting others. So what's the upshot here? As I said up front, number one, you're not alone. Number two, you know more than you think. And I really want to emphasize that, especially in the context of your own research. You have spent more time than almost anybody thinking about your topic, reading about your topic, writing about your topic, pondering your topic, right? And when you go to faculty members who are very well-intentioned and sincerely want to help you, you have to remember that they are answering questions or offering advice off the top of their heads. They have not thought about it nearly as much as you have. So you want to be a discriminating consumer of that information, right? And feel free to, in a positive way, kind of interrogate that, right? And think more about it and ask more questions, and do not assume that they know more than you. Okay, so I think I'm going to end there. I hope that this was helpful. If it was, please like the video, subscribe to the YouTube channel, share it with others. If you have particular thoughts or experiences you want to share related to this, or maybe other videos that you'd like to see, other topics you'd like me to talk about, please share that in the comments. And I hope to see you again soon. Until then, thanks for being here. Thanks for being you.